On the evening of June 4th, 2020, a young woman left her boyfriend's home in Soweto, South Africa. She was 8 months pregnant, expecting to give birth to her first child in just a few weeks. Her name was Tshegofatso Pule. 4 days later, hikers outside Johannesburg stumbled across a horrifying scene. Hanging from a tree was the body of a woman. She had been stabbed and tied to a rope. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. It wasn't just that she had been murdered. It was that she was carrying an unborn child. Two lives had been taken in one brutal act. As news spread, South Africa was outraged. For years, the country had been grappling with an epidemic of gender-based violence, with women often the victims of intimate partner crimes. But this case cut especially deep. Tshegofatso wasn't a stranger. She was young, ambitious, loved by her family, and about to become a mother. Her death became a symbol of the violence too many women faced every day. Police quickly identified her, and with that came more disturbing questions. Who would want to kill a heavily pregnant woman? Why would someone end her life so close to the day she was supposed to bring a child into the world? The investigation that followed uncovered a story of betrayal, manipulation, and a murder-for-hire plot that shocked the nation. At the center of it all was not a stranger in the shadows, but the man she trusted most. This is the case of Tshegofatso Pule, a story of love turned into betrayal, and how a crime against one woman became a rallying cry for an entire country. Before her name was tied to one of South Africa's most shocking murder cases, Tshegofatso Pule was simply known as a young woman full of life and promise. Born in 1992, she grew up in Meadowlands, Soweto, raised by a loving family that described her as warm, kind, and deeply caring. She was ambitious, always pushing herself to do better, and she carried herself with confidence and positivity. Friends remembered her as someone who loved fashion, who could light up a room with her presence, and who dreamed of building a good future for herself and her child. She was 28 years old and just weeks away from becoming a mother. The pregnancy was not only a personal milestone, it was something she openly celebrated with friends and family. Social media posts showed her excited, happy, and ready to take on motherhood. To those around her, Tshegofatso's life was just beginning. She was building relationships, making plans, and preparing for the responsibilities of raising a child. Her family described her as someone who had so much ahead of her: dreams of career opportunities, dreams of building a stable home, and dreams of raising her baby surrounded by love. But behind her radiant smile and hopeful plans, there were also private struggles. She had been in a complicated relationship with Ntuthuko Shoba, the man believed to be her boyfriend and the father of her unborn child. On the surface, it looked like a normal romance, but tensions grew when she became pregnant. Despite these challenges, Tshegofatso remained optimistic. She believed she was moving forward into a new chapter of her life, and for her family, the thought that someone would take that away, both her life and the life of her unborn baby, was unimaginable. When her body was found in early June 2020, the loss wasn't just personal for those who knew her. It became a symbol for an entire country, a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable women can be, even to those closest to them. On the night of June 2020, Tshegofatso Pule visited the home of her boyfriend, Ntuthuko Shoba, in Florida, a suburb of Johannesburg. She was heavily pregnant, 8 months along, and carrying visible excitement for the baby she would soon bring into the world. Neighbors later recalled seeing her that evening. She wore comfortable clothes and looked relaxed, as if it was just another quiet night. For Tshegofatso, there was no reason to believe this would be her final journey. At some point that evening, she received a phone call. Security cameras in the area later captured her leaving Shoba's home and walking toward a car that pulled up outside. Witnesses saw her get into the vehicle. She didn't seem distressed, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. That was the last time she was seen alive. For the next few days, her family and friends grew anxious. She didn't return home. Her phone went silent. Texts and calls went unanswered. At first, some hoped she might have been resting or visiting someone. But as the hours stretched into days, dread began to settle in. On June 8th, 4 days after she was last seen, hikers in Rudaport stumbled across a body hanging from a tree. It was Tshegofatso. She had been stabbed in the chest before being tied with rope and left hanging. The brutality of the scene left no doubt. This was murder. For her family, the confirmation was devastating. They had expected to welcome a baby into their lives. Instead, they were forced to bury a daughter and her unborn child. The discovery set off an intense police investigation. The questions came quickly. Who was the driver of the car that picked her up? Who arranged for her to leave Shoba's house that night? And why would anyone target a young woman about to become a mother? The answers would reveal a chilling plot, one that pointed not to strangers, but to the people closest to her. When Tshegofatso Pule's body was discovered on June 8, 2020, the brutality of the crime demanded immediate answers. She was 8 months pregnant. She had been stabbed and left hanging from a tree. It was clear this was not random violence. It was targeted, deliberate, and deeply personal. Police quickly began reconstructing her final hours. CCTV footage from Ntuthuko Shoba's neighborhood provided their first major lead. The cameras showed Tshegofatso leaving the Shoba's home and then getting into a silver vehicle waiting outside. That vehicle and its driver became the key to unraveling the case. Within days, investigators traced the car back to Muzikais Malafane, a 31-year-old man with a criminal past. When questioned, he admitted his role in the crime, but his confession went further than police expected. Malafane claimed he had not acted alone, that he had been hired to kill Tshegofatso. In his statement, he described how he picked her up outside Shoba's house under the pretense of giving her a ride. Instead, he drove her to an isolated area where he stabbed her, tied her body with rope, and left her hanging from a tree. He said the murder was not his idea. He had been promised payment to carry it out. The shocking revelation shifted the investigation from a single act of violence to a conspiracy. Police now had to determine who ordered the killing and why. The focus quickly turned back to Ntuthuko Shoba, the man who had been with Tshegofatso the night she vanished. As Malafane was arrested and charged with murder, investigators dug deeper into his claims. What they found pointed toward a murder-for-hire plot that exposed the dark side of a relationship that had already been under strain. When Muzikais Malafane was brought into custody, investigators expected resistance. Instead, they got a confession that cracked the case wide open. Malafane admitted that he was the one who killed Tshegofatso Pule. He described in chilling detail how he lured her into his car, drove her out of Johannesburg, and stabbed her before hanging her body from a tree. But then he said something that stunned police. He hadn't acted alone. He claimed he was hired. According to his testimony, the person who orchestrated the murder was Ntuthuko Shoba, Tshegofatso's boyfriend and the father of her unborn child. Malafane told the court that Shoba had approached him multiple times, asking him to get rid of Tshegofatso because her pregnancy would expose him and damage his reputation. Malafane said he was promised 70,000 rand, roughly $4,000 for the job. He admitted that he accepted the contract, knowing full well what it meant. His testimony painted Shoba as the mastermind, the man who wanted Tshegofatso silenced before her pregnancy became public knowledge. The confession shocked the nation. This wasn't just a brutal killing. It was a betrayal from the man who was supposed to love her most. The fact that Shoba, a man with a stable job and respectable image, could plot such a crime made the story even more disturbing. Malafane eventually pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2020, but his testimony was far from the end. It became the cornerstone of the state's case against Shoba, who now faced trial not as a grieving boyfriend, but as the alleged mastermind of his pregnant girlfriend's murder. With one confession, the case shifted from a horrific act of violence to a story of conspiracy, betrayal, and the darkest kind of intimate partner crime. For investigators, the confession from Muzikayise Malafane pointed to a disturbing truth. The man behind Tshegofatso Pule's murder was not a stranger, but the person she trusted most, her boyfriend, Ntuthuko Shoba. Shoba was described as soft-spoken, well-dressed, and employed in the financial sector. Outwardly, he appeared respectable, but behind the facade, prosecutors said he was leading a double life. Shoba was already married, or at least in a long-term committed relationship with another woman. Tshegofatso's pregnancy threatened to expose him. According to Malafane's testimony, Shoba approached him multiple times, desperate to make the problem go away. The pregnancy was seen as a risk to his image, his lifestyle, and possibly his career. Prosecutors argued that Shoba didn't want to take responsibility for the baby, nor did he want his other partner to find out. Instead of owning up to his choices, he allegedly plotted Tshegofatso's death. He arranged for Malafane to be waiting outside his home the night she visited. When Tshegofatso walked out of Shoba's front door, she unknowingly stepped into a trap designed by the man she thought cared for her. For the court, the motive was as clear as it was cruel: reputation over responsibility. Shoba valued his social standing more than the life of Tshegofatso and the life of his unborn child. This revelation outraged the public. It wasn't just a crime of violence, it was a crime of betrayal. The image of Tshegofatso, excited to become a mother, contrasted sharply with the man who should have been by her side, but instead orchestrated her murder. In South Africa, where gender-based violence was already a national crisis, Shoba's role became symbolic of a wider problem. Men who viewed women's lives as disposable when it threatened their comfort or status. The stage was now set for a courtroom battle that would expose every detail of the plot and determine whether justice would finally be served for Tshegofatso and her unborn child. When Ntuthuko Shoba finally stood trial in 2022, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens followed every detail, because this wasn't just about one woman's murder. It had become a symbol of South Africa's fight against gender-based violence. The prosecution presented a chilling case. They laid out the timeline: how Shoba called Tshegofatso over that night, how Malafane waited outside, and how the plan unfolded exactly as he had arranged. They pointed to CCTV footage, to phone records, and to Malafane's sworn testimony that Shoba had ordered the hit. The defense tried to cast doubt, arguing that Malafane was simply protecting himself by shifting blame. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury and judge were faced with a choice: believe the hired killer acted alone, or accept that Shoba had engineered the entire plot. In March 2022, the verdict was delivered. Ntuthuko Shoba was found guilty of orchestrating the murder of Tshegofatso Pule. The judge called the crime cold-blooded and premeditated, stressing that Shoba had betrayed the trust of a woman carrying his child. His sentence was severe: life in prison. There would be no leniency, no second chance. For Tshegofatso's family, the judgment brought some measure of justice, though it could never erase their pain. They had buried not just a daughter, but also the unborn grandchild they had been waiting to welcome. For many South Africans, the trial felt like more than one man's conviction. It was a warning that the country could not stay silent while women continued to die at the hands of partners who claimed to love them. When the judge read the life sentence, the courtroom was silent. It was the closing of a chapter in one of South Africa's most heartbreaking crimes. But it also left behind a question: how many more Tshegofatsos would it take before real change arrived? The murder of Tshegofatso Pule was not just another crime statistic. It was the story of a young woman whose life and unborn child were stolen by the man she trusted most. Her death struck a nerve in South Africa, where gender-based violence had already reached epidemic levels. For weeks after her body was found, protests filled the streets. Marches and vigils were held across Johannesburg and beyond, with people demanding justice not only for Tshegofatso, but for all the women who never make the headlines. Activists carried posters that read, "Am I next?" A haunting reminder that her story was not isolated, but part of a larger crisis. Her case sparked debates in parliament, in schools, and in homes. Leaders called for stronger protections for women, tougher sentences for perpetrators, and more resources for victims of domestic abuse. While promises were made, many South Africans remained skeptical, pointing out that change had been promised before. For Tshegofatso's family, the pain will never fade. They lost a daughter, a sister, and a grandchild they were ready to welcome into the world. Her death left a permanent scar, but her name also became a rallying cry, proof that the fight for justice could no longer be ignored. Internationally, her case gained attention as well. News outlets from the US to Europe reported on her story, often describing it as emblematic of the struggles women face worldwide. Her name joined a long list of victims whose deaths remind us how fragile safety can be, even within the walls of a relationship. Today, Tshegofatso Pule is remembered not just for the way she died, but for the change her story demanded. A young woman full of love, excitement, and hope for motherhood, reduced to a statistic, but also elevated as a symbol of resistance. Her case leaves us with difficult questions. How do we stop the cycle of violence? How do we hold men accountable when power, reputation, and pride become motives for murder? And most importantly, how do we ensure that Tshegofatso's death was not in vain? This is the legacy of Tshegofatso Pule, a life cut short, but a voice that continues to echo in the fight for justice. What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served with Ntuthuko Shoba's life sentence? Or do you believe more still needs to be done to protect women in South Africa? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want to see more deep dive true crime stories from around the world, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next case. Because every story deserves to be remembered, and together we can keep their voices alive.